Hi, in this video I'm going to be taking a look at the key differences between holding a property or properties in a SIPP compared to holding them in a SSAS. So this video is going to be quite specific. We're not going to be looking at the other key differences between SIPP and SSAS. I may touch on them, but this one is all about holding a property in a SIPP or a SSAS pension scheme. Hi, I'm Edward, and for about 19 years I've been practicing as a chartered surveyor, as a member of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. During that time I've also been an RICS registered valuer. My entire career has been based on advising institutions, so big corporates, as well as private individual investors on the merits of specific property investments. I've also been an associate lecturer teaching real estate valuation and real estate investment finance at Oxford Brookes University, and most recently I was head of investment finance for a FTSE 100 listed company based in the City of London. So hopefully I've got a lot of practical, hands-on and also theoretical experience that I can share with you to help your property investment journey be a lot more enjoyable, pain-free and also profitable. So having said that, I'm going to focus this video on holding property in either a SIPP or a SSAS pension. I think it's probably important that we cover off a little bit of jargon first of all. So first and foremost, and forgive me if I am teaching you to suck eggs, I think it's important to understand that the beneficiaries of any pension scheme are called members. So they are the people that benefit at retirement age from the money and the value of the assets that is held in that pension scheme. So both SIPP and SSAS pensions can have multiple members. In this instance though, we're going to keep it fairly simple. We're just going to assume that either the SIPP product that we talk about or the SSAS product that we talk about has one member and one member only. Okay, so then we need to move on to the next piece of jargon, which is the word occupational. Now, a SSAS is an occupational pension scheme. That means it's set up by an employer for the beneficiary of the employees of a business. Now, that's quite a key detail in that. A SIPP, on the other hand, is typically not going to be an occupational pension scheme. So let's just go back a bit and revisit that. If a SSAS is an occupational scheme, it then follows that it is typically set up by someone who is a business owner. So if you're watching this video and you don't own a business, but you like the idea of holding property in a pension, it's probably a very good idea to rewind back a little bit further and actually consider the merits of going through the process of setting up a business in order to have a SSAS pension, in order that you can then hold property in it. Please excuse this brief interlude, but I'm editing the video that you're watching right now, and I've realised that when you have bright lights and cameras in your face and you're not a professional presenter, it's very easy to actually lose track of some of the more important points that you want to say. And at this particular juncture in the video, I wanted to add the following list of administrative duties and responsibilities that are a requirement of a SSAS pension trustee to carry out every year, or at least through the lifetime of the management of a SSAS. And also it is my intention, because I haven't actually written out the list yet, to set out side by side the equivalent responsibilities that are bestowed upon the professional trustees that administer a SIPP. So I hope you find that list helpful. Here it is now. That's quite a useful list there of the responsibilities that a trustee for a SIPP or a SSAS might find themselves burdened with. And should also help you begin to form that idea of whether you actually want to take on that sort of administrative management burden, or not, and that will help steer your path down either the SIPP route or the SSAS route. Now, I said right at the outset that this video is going to focus on property in SIPP or a SSAS, and it doesn't matter whether you choose to go down the SIPP or SSAS route. There are some rules which are shared between both products, and one of those is that you may only hold commercial property in your SIPP or your SSAS. Just to clarify then, residential property is not allowed to be held in a SIPP or a SSAS. Now, the reason why I'm grinning here is because there are always exceptions to every rule, and later on this year I'm really looking forward to catching up with someone called James Hadley on this channel to discuss with him the way in which he is using recognised and perfectly legitimate techniques and structures here in the UK to enable the capture and retention of residential property assets inside pension wrappers. But for the purposes of this video and this video alone, let's keep it simple and keep it vanilla flavoured. So, if you stick to the rule that you may only have commercial property in your SIPP or your SSAS, you are on solid ground. And what is commercial property? Well, commercial property can vary massively. It seems obvious to a lot of people that commercial property would include assets like high street retail units, office blocks, industrial property, logistic property, data centres, storage land, that sort of thing. But also commercial property can be quite varied and quite nuanced. So I touched on storage land there, and actually an open area of ground that is subject to a commercial lease for the purposes of storing materials or product or shipping, that sort of thing, that is commercial property. It might even be that there's no building on that property at all. Something like commercial forestry as well is also able to be captured inside a SIPP or a SSAS product. The grey area comes when you consider certain types of occupation of property by people on a domestic basis. So care homes or houses of multiple occupation, hotels, bed and breakfast accommodation, guest houses and serviced accommodation. Some of those are qualifying assets, they are commercial property, and some of them aren't. So rather than giving you a definitive list, because these things are changing all the time and they're really, really subtle, some of these changes, I would suggest that if you have any questions around whether something is commercial property or not, get in touch with me. I'd be very happy to help you answer that question directly, or I will signpost you to a firm of regulated chartered surveyors who will happily give you that sort of qualification and advice around whether something is commercial property or not. If it felt like that last section was sounding a note of caution about commercial property and making sure that you have a clear understanding of what qualifies as commercial property and residential property, I'm going to continue on that slightly cautious theme and suggest that fools rush in. I have seen quite a lot of posts on the internet saying, I've set up my SIS, or actually getting a commercial building into a SIPP or a SSAS pension wrapper is now a fairly well-trodden path. There are processes that need to be followed. They're not necessarily especially onerous, and they don't really add any time to the process of acquiring property. But there are steps that have to be followed. So we're talking about acquisition. The purchase or the movement of a commercial building from one legal ownership into the legal purview of your SIPP or your SSAS pension wrapper. And in both cases, the process is remarkably similar. So I'm going to be quite generalist at this particular point in time. So first and foremost, let's assume that the building that you want to move into your pension wrapper is currently for sale on the open market. What if your pension has, say, £100,000 in it, but the building you want to buy is £125,000. Well, in that instance, in both cases, SIPP or SAS, you can borrow, subject to credit terms being met and that sort of thing, up to 50% of the value of the funds in your SIPP or your SAS pension wrapper. So in our example, the building being the value of the pension being £100,000, the building being £125,000, we can see that as long as we're approved for credit, we could potentially borrow that £25,000 delta. So, just to summarise that point, it is possible with both a SIPP or a SAS to borrow up to 50% of the value of the funds in your SIPP or SAS pension wrapper. I would advise you though to make sure that you understand the financial performance of the building you're planning to buy well ahead of borrowing money to support the acquisition of that building. In fact, well ahead of investing your precious pension monies in the acquisition of that building. And it is very, very easy to accurately and legitimately project the financial performance of a building well ahead of making any financial commitment whatsoever to acquire it. And if you are watching this video and you're thinking, well, how on earth do you do that sort of financial projection, that sort of calculation? Please do go on the comments section below and you will see a link there to be able to register your interest for my next very short course, which explains exactly how you go through that process. And I would be delighted if you joined me on that short course, which will be happening later in the year. Moving on then, we've talked about loans, we've talked about this word acquisition. We are going to cover off a little bit more jargon, and that's this very important word, especially with the world of SIPP and SAS pensions. And this word is connection or connected. When you hear about someone being a connected party, it means that they are more than likely related to you. And so, let's paint a picture here. Right, rather than being on the open market, the building you want to buy is owned by your parents. And so it means that in order to satisfy HMRC rules for pensions, you have to get that building independently valued by an RICS or a Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors registered valuer to verify and ensure that you are paying, or that your pension rather, is paying the correct market value for that building at the point at which it enters and is acquired by your pension scheme. Right, quite a lot there. So let's just recap on that. You've set up your SIPP or your SAS pension, you have adequate money in your SIPP or your SAS pension, and you want to buy a commercial building that is currently owned by your parents. By dint of the fact you are directly related to them, your parents are a connected party. Because that building is therefore owned by a connected party, we need to remove any doubt in the eyes of HMRC that you could potentially be getting a favourable deal and buying it at a rate that is discounted to market. So you have to appoint an independent valuer, approved and registered and regulated by the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, to conduct what is colloquially called a Red Book valuation. That valuation will attest to the fact that you are buying that building at market value, or what used to be called open market value. Once that valuation has taken place, that property can be transferred from your parents' ownership into the ownership of your SIPP or your SAS pension, and there's a documented paper trail to prove that you have paid open market value for that building. If we continue on this theme of connected parties and connected parties, very, very common in this world is a situation where the property is now inside the SIPP or the SAS, and the property, the commercial property, is occupied by a connected party. So a common example of this would be that a SIPP or a SAS is set up by someone that runs a business, and the building is appropriate for the operation of that business. Let's say it's a car mechanic enterprise in the light industrial unit, and that the person that is a beneficiary of that SIPP or that SAS also runs that car mechanic business inside that building. So you can see we've got connection all over the place there. Your pension owns the building and you are a beneficiary of that pension, but you run and operate the business that occupies the building that's owned by your pension. So immediately you might be thinking, well, actually that could be quite beneficial because I could pay a lower rate of rent because it's kind of my pension and therefore I can be friendly. And by charging my business a lower rate of rent, I can de-stress the monthly operating costs of my business. Or another way, you might say, well, actually, I own and operate that business and I know it's going gangbusters and financially it's very, very healthy indeed. I'll turn up the dial and I will pay more rent. I will pay an increased amount of rent from the business each month or each quarter into my pension pot because my pension owns the building. In both cases, that's a massive no-no. You can't do that. We referred a little while ago to RICS registered chartered surveyors attesting and verifying the market value of buildings at the point at which they enter a SIPP or a SAS pension. The same happens here. On a regular basis, when you have a lease renewal event or a rent review event, it is absolutely imperative to recognise that you will need to appoint a chartered surveyor to confirm that the business that is occupying that building is paying market rent, correct market rent for the occupation of that property. It cannot be too low an amount and it cannot be too high an amount. It has to be the amount of rent that reflects the prevailing rent for that type of building in the market at that particular point in time. Now, a short while ago we discussed using loans to help you acquire property into your SIPP or your SAS. There is also worth mentioning here another way of using loans, specifically lending money from your pension wrapper in order to gain exposure to property investment or property development activity. Now, SIPP and SAS both vary on this point, but it's worth pointing out that both SIPP and SAS will allow you to make a loan towards legitimate investment activities. The difference, and it is quite distinct, is that you may lend money from your SAS to a connected party, whereas with a SIPP, you may not lend money to a connected party. And like I say, in both instances, those loans from your pension wrappers need to be into and towards legitimate investment opportunities. So it follows then that if a third party approaches you and says, I would like you to lend me money from your pension wrapper in order that I can undertake this property investment or this property development activity, it's absolutely imperative that you understand whether, first and foremost, you are permitted within the rules of your SIPP or SAS to make that loan. And if you are, it is even more imperative to understand for yourself personally whether that is a legitimate investment activity. And by legitimate, what I'm personally referring to there is whether actually that person or organisation you're lending to has the credentials to be able to deliver what they say they're going to deliver, and whether that build project or property investment that they are putting in front of you, no doubt with some form of glossy brochure, is actually capable of delivering in the way they say it will. Now, to address all of this, because it is actually an area that I take extremely seriously, I am preparing a beta short course for a period for no more than 10 people. I just want 10 people maximum, so it is limited to 10 people maximum. It's not more than £40 per person, so it's $39.99. This is a beta course designed expressly to attend to this particular issue of where people like you have been asked to lend money to property development schemes or property investment schemes, and you're not sure about the organisation or people that are asking you for that money, and you're not sure about whether the particular property investment or property development project actually is going to give you the returns that you are being told will come your way after making the loan. So if that sounds like it could be interesting and you want to be one of that first cohort of 10, I'd be absolutely delighted if you would join me. There is a link in the section below, in the blurb below. Please do register your interest and I will get in touch with you very, very shortly. Right, let's just wrap that little piece up though, because I've talked around the theory of what's involved there, but actually not addressed specifically the different treatments of loans from SIPP and SAS. So, to summarise, you may lend money from a SAS to a connected party, and with a SIPP, you may not lend money from your SIPP to a connected party. So, SAS, you can lend to a connected party. SIPP, you may not lend to a connected party. In both cases though, in particular a SIPP, you're really going to have to demonstrate the investment credentials to a SIPP. But in both cases, any loans that you make in this regard need to be to coherent or cogent investment opportunities. When I was Head of Valuation and Professional Real Estate Services for a very, very large SIPP and SAS administrator a few years ago, I had the privilege of being one of the people, because I was a chartered surveyor, I was one of the people that was getting out on the ground, meeting owners of buildings, occupiers of buildings, and talking with them. And my point in raising this is that quite often there would be, should we say, a little bit miffed about the fact that I had to be on site. No, in fact, that wasn't what bothered them. What bothered them was that they would have to pay a fee for the work I needed to do on site, i.e. evaluation, or inspect the building ahead of some form of rent review or lease renewal event. And there was a prevailing perception that the SIPP or SAS administrator had sprung on them this unknown fee cost event, and they were annoyed about it because the cost of paying my fee or the fees of a chartered surveyor or legal counsel come from the pension pot, and every time you take a fee out of a pension pot it diminishes the financial performance of that pension pot. So where am I going with this? Well, my point is that it does not matter whether you own a commercial property inside a pension wrapper or outside a pension wrapper, there will be costs associated with that commercial property. However, it is a truism that within a SIPP, as opposed to a SAS, there are probably slightly more costs associated with commercial property, but ever so slight, ever so slight. And that's normally because with a SIPP, the trustees, i.e. the administrators who are professionally appointed to be the trustees of your SIPP, have to meet a slightly different standard of requirements when it comes to the regulated management of your SIPP. My point is, they will probably insist on absolutely everything being done by the book, or at least they should if they're doing their job properly. But like I say, you own a commercial property in a SIPP or a SAS wrapper or outside a SIPP or a SAS wrapper, you are going to be exposed to costs. So, for example, it's a really good idea whether you own a property inside a SIPP or a SAS or outside a SIPP or a SAS to maintain it to the best standard you reasonably can. And the reason for that is that a well-maintained property is going to be more enjoyable and more comfortable to occupy than a property that is falling apart bit by bit by bit. If you have a property that is more comfortable and enjoyable to occupy, chances are your tenant will remain in situ for a longer period of time. And that can only be a good thing as long as they're paying the rent, right? Because if you have lots of voids in the occupancy of your building, it means you're paying agents, generally speaking, agents to market your property, then get a tenant in occupation, and then you've probably got a 2 or a 6 month rent-free period to incentivize the tenant to come and occupy your building. So you've got what's called lumpy cash flow, and we don't want that. We want to have smooth, continuous, predictable cash flow. So what's this got to do with costs? Well, there are costs of management of a property, regardless of whether it's inside a pension wrapper or outside a pension wrapper. But the costs, I think, that really tend to catch up with people that have their commercial building in pension wrapper are costs associated with valuation and legal advice. So, when you reach a certain age, there is a requirement in the world of both SIPP and SAS to report the value of the pension to the relevant authority, probably HMRC and maybe a few others. And that is to say to the government, this particular pension wrapper has beneficiaries that are now of an age where they can draw down the pension. So we, as the trustees of this pension, are required and are telling you, the government, the value of this pension pot at this particular point in time. And where you have buildings in that pension pot, a valuer is required to meet out that valuation instruction requirement. Equally, when you have a lease that expires and it needs to be renewed, you will probably need to appoint a chartered surveyor to advise you on new lease terms and advise you on the prevailing market rent. Not only that, you will probably need to pay a solicitor to draft a new lease for you as well. These are just a few situations where I can think of professionals intervening in some way in the life of your property whilst it is held in your SIPP or SAS wrapper that will incur some sort of cost for your pension pot. And I stress that particular point. These fees can be paid directly from cash held in your pension pot. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt, right? It's still your pension money that is going out the door to pay for professional fees. So what can we do about this? Well, what we can do about this is make sure that prior to committing in any way to the acquisition of a building, we model its anticipated financial returns, and also we can look at the age of you, the beneficiary, and say, well, it is likely that in X years' time we're going to have a valuation event or a lease event, and so we can then forecast in surveyor's fees, legal fees, any professional fees that we think may happen at a particular point in time. By doing that, we can make sure that the building itself performs financially in such a way that all of those fees are adequately covered, and still that building gives us a positive, profitable cash flow. And that's the whole idea here, that we continue to build these pension pots, these pension wrappers with positive cash flowing, profitable buildings. So that is a bit of a whistle stop through property in SIPP and SAS pensions. If I've missed anything, please do let me know, because these videos are only going to get better if there is feedback from professionals in the industry who can help inform the quality and the depth of information that I'm imparting in videos like this one. But in the meantime, thank you very much for watching, and if you're interested in participating on that beta course, like I say, it's limited to 10 people only, and that beta course will help people that have been invited to invest money from their pension wrapper into a third-party property investment or property development. Please do go on the link below for that. And also, if you would like to participate in a short course where you calculate property investment returns, again, please do register interest below. I'd love to hear from you. In the meantime, have a fantastic day and thanks for watching.